Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex. And last night I was going through my channel and looking at the videos, and I realized that the tier 3 selector guide from 3 weeks ago hit 100,000 views, which is absolutely insane in 3 weeks. That is just absurd. I had no idea that the video blew up that much. So I wanted to say thank you to all the people that watch the video and support me and support the channel and are part of the community. And I wanted to give back to you. And I thought, what better way to combine the tier 3 selector guide than with updated recommendation CTPs for all of the existing tier 3 characters. So we're going to be going through all the tier 3 characters, starting with Scarlet Witch, working our way down to Thor. And then we're going to go with the ones I don't have yet: Black Widow, SpiderMan, and what's the last one? Black Panther. And I'm going to be giving you 3 CTP, basically my number 1, number 2, and number 3 CTP recommendations. Obviously, some of those are going to shift to first place or third place or second place, depending on whether you want the character for PvE or PvP. Just to give you a really quick recap, Rage, Energy, Judgment, and Destruction are all PvE CTPs. Those are things for Squad Battle, World Boss, ABX, stuff like that. And then, you've got your Regen, Authority, Insight, and I'm missing another one. No, just those ones would be for PvP. Now, Destruction's a little bit in between. Destruction's a little bit for PvP as well. Actually, it's mostly for PvP, but it can also be used for PvE. So you sort of understand where I'm coming from when I say these things, rather than me having to repeat them for every single character. And since we're going from Scarlet Witch down to Thor and we're following my list of characters, you can just fast forward in the video if you don't necessarily need to know these characters, and you just need to know the ones in the middle, let's say Wolverine or Doctor Strange or what have you, because it will go sequentially, Quicksilver, Thanos, Apocalypse, etc. But if you want to watch the whole video and watch all the ads, that would help me out a lot, so I would love that as well. So, started off with Scarlet Witch. I haven't owned her for a while, but I have done quite a bit of research into other people's content, videos, and their sort of supporting documentation as far as her is concerned, as far as her power level is concerned, and she seems to be quite strong with a CTP of Rage. So CTP of Rage would be my first choice for her. I still think that she is more PvE oriented than PvP oriented. Because she's sort of the total package, especially against Ebony. You don't have to worry about bringing a mind control striker. You don't have to worry about bringing an all defense down striker. She gains value there, although she loses value as a striker. So the second CTP I would say for her, number 2, would be Energy, which is what I currently have equipped. She dismantled stage 70 Ebony in just a couple of minutes with the old uniform. We're not even rocking the new one yet. And then number 3 would be Regen, because she actually gets a decent chunk of HP from her tier 3. You can see I'm at 40,000 with just a couple. Actually, I got 4 HP Urus, but not too many. So I think you can bump up her HP quite a lot, and that would be good for PvP. Moving on to Quicksilver. Quicksilver is really good for PvE and PvP. He may not be as good as some other characters. He may rely a little bit more on all defense down and things like that, but he's really good against Galactus. So given the current meta, I probably would say that Rage is the number 1 option for him to fly through all these world bosses and to fly through Galactus especially. He doesn't seem to do very well in Squad Battle, which is a bit of a disappointment. Man, these animations, you just don't see him. It's kind of funny because it's kind of true, but he just dips and then you barely see him. The second best CTP for Quicksilver, however, would be Greed, because Greed is going to give him that flexibility for PvP. It's going to give him more ignore dodge, so he can basically one-shot any character regardless of how much dodge they have, because his base 50% dodge stacks with that, or 50% ignore dodge stacks with the ignore dodge on the CTP, and he gets a little bit extra healing. And then the third best CTP for Quicksilver would be Energy. Now, it's hard to proc for him, which is why Energy goes after Greed, comes third, but it is still a decent option for him, and the 5 cancel 4 combo is still very lethal. Coming up next, we have the big dog Thanos. He hasn't changed in a year. This is the first year in a long time that we don't have a new Thanos uniform, but he is still top dog for PvP. So I would say Regen is the number 1 CTP for him. You can build him for PvE, but he just struggles compared to a lot of these characters. Like, he's not even half as good as Professor X is for PvE, even if they both have identical builds. So because of that, I can't recommend Rage number 1. I recommend Rage number 2 primarily for ABX. That's pretty much a given there. But if you don't like ABX, then Rage is basically off the table. And then number 3, you'd have Authority. You could also mess around with Greed as well, but you can see that he's heavily PvP oriented because he's just a big beefy boy and he just wants to slap you and kill you, and he wants to claim all the Infinity Stones. That's just how it is for Big Thanos. We know how it goes. Apocalypse, kind of like Thanos, but much harder hitting. I would still recommend Regen first, just because he's a really expensive tier 3 and he has such a big HP pool, and he's basically one of the only combat types that can really hang with Thanos. and do well. Like, I got 66,000 HP. You just can't ignore that. And he can still do well with a PvP build. And he can do well with a PvE build in PvP. It's actually really nice. So I would recommend Rage second, but I think the Regen and Rage are very, very close together. And then third for Apocalypse, I would recommend Greed. I don't really think Judgment is that good for him. I think if you're going to go with a Judgment, you might as well save it for someone else and just give him a mind damage proc. It's not hard to proc for Apocalypse. He's easy to proc. So I would save Judgment for characters that are a lot harder to proc on their skills, like Iceman or Luna Snow. Because his is just an easy 4 cancel 5 combo. It's really not that bad at all. So it does synergize with a regular Obelisk or even like a CTP of energy or something like that. Coming up next, we got Jean Grey, and the reigning PvP queen. We got to go with Greed first. I've had Greed on her for a long time, and it definitely is the best option. It gives her so much punching power, and it gives her just a little bit of extra defense, and it protects her. The main thing here is it protects her from AntMans and Quicksilvers. You can't have any more funny business with the guaranteed dodge. That doesn't work anymore on Jean Grey. So it's a huge threat, and that's why Greed is the #1 option for her. If you don't go with Greed, she's still a god with Rage, so Rage has to be #2. It's still going to give you tons of power in PvP, but it's also going to give you a lot in PvE. It's going to give you a ton of PvE, but it also gives you work in PvP. And then finally, for Jean, I suggest Regen third for just like super tankiness. Mr. Fantastic, not as good as some of these other characters. I would recommend Rage first for him, just to take advantage of the skill spam. The skill spamming that you can do. Can you chill, brother? Can you stop stretching that thing in front of me? Just stretch that around your wife, okay? Don't stretch that in front of me. Anyways, Rage #1 for Mr. Fantastic. Energy #2. Forgo Nation showed off some really nice videos of Mr. Fantastic with a CTP of energy, so it's definitely possible. And then Destruction third for Mr. Fantastic. He doesn't really have much PvP value. Destruction's decent for the penetration, but ultimately I would just use it for the proc, because he's just not going to do much in PvP. Next up, we've got the big bad Canadian Wolverine. For him, I say Regen first because of the PvP potential and the HP. Like, I got this here, and he's up, what, 80,000, 85,000, 86,000 HP. So yeah, you really can't deny that. He's not the best for PvP because of the prevalence of speed blast types, but if ever the speed meta comes back, then Wolverine will be right there to counter it. If you don't go with Regen, Rage is not a bad option, or Authority in third place for him. Next up, we've got Doctor Strange. Like Thanos, hasn't gotten a uniform in a long time, but still very, very good. Now, I think Rage is pretty much the best option for him because of how flexible it makes him for so many different world bosses and how difficult his rotation is with a regular proc. Doctor Strange is basically the only character that I recommend. If you don't give him a Rage, do not give him any proc. So I cannot recommend Energy, I cannot recommend Destruction, because regular proc obelisks, even if there's chain hit damage, it just does not work. He needs that consistent spike, that consistent bump of the Rage. So if it's not a Rage #1, I would say a Regen #2 and then Authority #3, and that would be purely or mostly for PvP. But remember, PvE, Doctor Strange with a Regen or with an Authority can still do stage 40, 50 of world boss, because he's just that powerful with the, you know, constant spam of the tier 3. Speaking of really, really powerful for world boss, Holiday Lady Deadpool. Now, if you don't have this uniform, even if you have Deadpool tier 3, you are going to see a massive drop in the usability and the power of this character. That's just kind of the way it is with the power creep, especially because of that 5th skill, Deadpool Parade, with the -80% all defense down. You can check out other videos to find out why that's so potent. But essentially for Deadpool, Energy is probably the best option for you because of the chain hit damage and for the, you know, power in PvE. And then I would probably say Regen next for PvP, and then Destruction last. I think Regen is a little bit better than Destruction because he already has, or she already has, penetration. You got super armor, barrier, shield, and immune. No invincibility penetration, but I think that's okay. And you've got a really long iframe on 4. I'm personally rocking Destruction, but I think that if I was going to go fully into PvE or fully into PvP, I would go with one of those other options, Destruction or Energy. Namor, on the other hand, he's a rage boy. Absolutely a rage boy. Namor and Cyclops, the next one up, don't really have any value in PvP. So it goes Regen first for Namor, then Energy, then Judgment. Now, Judgment is only for Namor with the uniform. So keep that in mind. If you don't have the uniform, Judgment is off the table. Then you can go with something like Destruction, I guess, but it's really not that good. So you should probably just consider saving your CTP for someone else until you get his uniform, and then you can go for Judgment, Energy, or Rage, but Rage is obviously the best. Cyclops is basically exactly the same. It's Rage, Energy, and then Judgment. However, there's one difference for Cyclops. Because of Magneto rising in ABX power, some players have given, believe it or not, they've given Cyclops a CTP of Insight. I know that sounds really dirty, but you can actually go in the rankings and you can actually find them. And they gave Cyclops a CTP of Insight because he's got a good leadership, he's got a good passive, and then he would be supporting Magneto in ABX villain. And then when you have the Blast Mail Day, he also is there with Coulson and Professor X or Cyclops. So he does double duty there. So you will see some people who have an insight on him. I don't recommend it. That's just for like pure ABX focused players, but I do want to give those players a shout out because they're part of the game. Next up, we got the big bad Megonkus. He was bad, Magneto. He was really bad for a long time, got this white uniform, became an absolute donkey puncher, just so strong. Rage is the first option for him because he just does monster damage. Energy is actually really good for him as well, though, so don't count that one out. Abaddon has some really nice videos of Magneto and GBR with a CTP of energy. And then last, we have Authority for some AC action. I think Authority is not a bad option. He's got very low HP, so I don't think regen works. But with the iframes, Authority might not be a bad pick to make him like really annoying and hard to kill. Professor X, on the other hand, it's just pure PvE. He's like Namor. He doesn't really have any PvP action or PvP value. So it goes Rage, Judgment, Destruction. I don't really recommend Energy for Professor X. I might be wrong about this one. Maybe it should go Rage, Judgment, Energy. But Professor X just has a really weird skill rotation. And his 5th skill, Mind Over Matter, has a 20-second cooldown. You can't see it because the camera's blocking it. But that 20-second cooldown just makes it very hard for a CTP of energy. So that's why I suggested Judgment and then Destruction. Destruction would just be for some limited PvP action on his part. Up next, we've got Crescent. Not as good, but for ABX in particular, I would go Rage first for her and then Energy second. And then finally, if you wanted to try the Bear Girl in PvP, you could give her a regen. She has a very fat HP stat. You can see 62,000 with no HP Urus at all, no HP build. So you could get crazy with those stats if you wanted to, and she could make noise when certain Blast Tier 3s are banned from the meta, as you know. Next up, we got Captain America. Captain America is pretty easy. Rage is number 1, Energy is number 2, Destruction is number 3. Pretty straightforward, nothing much to talk about there. Sharon Rogers. Okay, technically, Rage is better for Sharon Rogers, and especially you're seeing this in squad battle. A lot more players are equipping it if they're trying to get top ranks in Platinum or Vibranium, but I think most players will be happy with Energy. So I'll put Rage first, but technically Energy is like almost as good for every other game mode besides squad battle. But anyways, Energy, Rage, you can interchange them. And then I would say Destruction third. Not really for PvP. She doesn't really have much value there, but it's a damage proc. It's more damage. Then we've got Iron Man. Unfortunately, Tony has taken a dive since the recent Striker changes. And to be honest, even before the Striker changes that came around, he wasn't really being used all that often. That's actually really cool that his boots are always on. I never noticed that. Anyways, for Iron Man, I would say Rage first, Energy second, and Destruction third. Iron Man could have some PvP value, maybe with a regen. He's got low-ish HP, but he's got that HP shield. I've always wondered if like a really tanky Iron Man could have some value because he's got 25% of his HP. So he's basically always got 125% of his HP to start the battle, and then he refreshes 10% every second. So if you're not taking constant damage, if you can sort of like duck in and duck out, maybe he could make it work, but because I don't have any evidence of him making it work, I cannot recommend it. Next, we've got AntMan. And AntMan, actually, I was thinking about it when I was making the notes for this video. With the addition of Mystique and Taskmaster, you pick one. AntMan might be a lot better for PvP now. Again, Greed does make him, a squashable bug. But if they're not running Greed, especially like a Thanos, you might have the punching power now with a Mystique on the team or a Taskmaster to actually kill them consistently. So that's really interesting. Now, for AntMan, because he has guard break immunity on his uniform option, you don't need to go with a guard break immunity obelisk for PvP. I choose Destruction first anyways because it's got the penetration and he doesn't have any penetration. But you can also go with something like a Rage, or you could go with something like a Regen. But honestly, almost any obelisk works for AntMan. That's the nice flexible thing about him. You could use Energy, and he could be good for both PvP and PvE because he still has guard break immunity. Some people will use Patience to max out his dodge. There's a lot of options. Luna, on the other hand, not a lot of options. Rage is the far and away best choice for her. A distant second would be Judgment. Now, Energy is third for me because it's harder to play. Energy will give you a better return overall than Judgment, but Judgment is just so much easier to play than Energy that if you calculate an average player's, successes and failures in landing the proc, I think over a long period of time, days, weeks, Judgment will have a bigger impact than Energy, even though on one isolated run by a top player, Energy will seem better than Judgment. So that's sort of how I explain things. and that's sort of how I see things for those 2 CTPs for her. Up next, we got Bucky. A bit of a letdown as a tier 3, to be honest. He definitely needs a new uniform to bring him into 2020. He's not quite there with the big boys. He doesn't even really match up to Black Widow, in my opinion. But if I were to give him CTPs, I would go with Rage first, because he's just a really annoying rotation. So Rage sort of takes away a lot of the guesswork. And then I would go with Energy second, because he still has a nice combo for this chain hit damage. And then I could go Regen third. Now, I don't think he has much PvP value right now, although he does have the fear on the smoke from explosive sabotage, and then he's got the iframe ignore. So he's actually still got some weapons for PvP, and he's got a very large HP stat for his speed type. 53,000 is abnormal. So yeah, he could make some noise in PvP, but I haven't seen it yet. Next up, we've got Captain Marvel. Rage first for her, primarily for PvE content. However, if you don't like PvE, this would be a situation where if you're not going to PvE with her, and she is losing value in PvE, don't get me wrong, she's mostly for ABX and squad battle. Actually, not even squad battle, just ABX. Then I would go with Destruction second. So Destruction might actually be first. Destruction is going to make her very good for PvP, and then semi-usable in PvE. And then third, if you're not going to use any of those, Energy is all right for the chain hit damage on like 4. Next up, we've got Thor, and Thor does rhyme with 4, and he's a big boy too. So for Thor, I would suggest Rage first, Energy second, and Judgment third. The reason why, unlike Luna, I put Energy ahead of Judgment is because Thor's rotation is not as difficult to do as Luna's, so I think Energy is more consistent, or can be much more consistent. Therefore, you will see much better returns overall in a long period of time. Now, the last 3, I don't have tier 3 yet, so it's not really like a smooth transition. We've got Black Widow here. Again, I don't have her tier 3, so I'm judging based on what other people have done. From what I've seen, she's disgustingly strong with the CTP of Rage. Not a surprise there, but yeah, just huge damage, and it also fits the fact that her rotation is kind of awkward. Energy would be my second choice for her, and that's what I have on her now, and she's actually very, very good. It took me about 7 minutes to solo Galactus, so that was kind of slow, but it was my first time playing her against Galactus, so maybe I can do it faster. And then I would recommend Authority third for PvP. That one's a little bit like asterisk worthy, but it's something to think about for you AC purists. Second last but not least, we got the big old Spidey. Not as good as he once was. We know Far From Home didn't do him enough justice, but for Spider-Man, I still think the reigning choice for CTP is Destruction, because it's going to give him that penetration that he needs to punch back in PvP when enemies pop their invincibility and stuff like that. If not a Destruction, Rage is actually pretty good for him for Corvus and for Galactus. And then finally, Energy would be third because he has a nice chain hit combo on 4 cancel 5. Last but not least, we have Black Panther. And why did you tier 3 Black Panther? No, I'm just kidding. Black Panther, not a very strong character. By far the weakest tier 3 in the game. Not good at all for PvP. Not very good for PvE. He sadly needs a massive overhaul a la Magneto. But if you wanted to make it work for Black Panther, if you wanted to give him all your love, then give it to someone else. No, I can't convince you. You're still gonna. Okay, fine. CTP of Rage would be number 1 for Black Panther. CTP of Energy would be number 2, and then CTP of Destruction would be number 3. So that concludes the list for the top 3 suggestions that I have for CTPs for all of the existing 25 tier 3s. Let me know if you liked the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.